Okay, you got me now?
Yep.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Take two here. My name is Todd Kimball. I'll be your MC this morning. Minor technical difficulties as I cannot see you, but you can see me, and we will do just fine here today. A great day in college football yesterday for Oregon and Oregon State fans. Oregon State became bowl eligible for the first time in a handful of years, and Oregon continues to win. They'll keep their number 3 ranking in the country, dominating the Washington State Cougars yesterday. And that's the sports update for this morning. A reminder that humanism is a rational philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. It advocates the extension of participatory democracy and the expansion of an open society, standing for human rights and social justice. And our reader this morning is Joyce Lackey. Joyce?
There, am I unmuted?
Gotcha.
All right. The reading is from E.M. Forster's essay, What I Believe. It was copyrighted in 1939. We all know what was going on in Europe and Forster's Britain in 1939. But this statement of his personal belief system, I think, opens up some questions about our current crises. I do not believe in belief, but this is an age of faith where one is surrounded by so many militant creeds that in self-defense, one has to formulate a creed of one's own. Tolerance, good temper, and sympathy are no longer enough in a world which is rent by religious and racial persecution, and where ignorance rules and science, who ought to have ruled, plays the subservient pimp. Tolerance, good temper, and sympathy. For the moment, they don't seem enough. Their action is no stronger than a flower battered beneath a military jackboot. Even though I do not believe in it for its own sake, I live in that age of faith. It is bloody in every sense of the word. But to keep up my end in it, where do I start? With personal relationships. Here is something comparatively solid in a world full of violence and cruelty. Not absolutely solid, for psychology has shown that there is something incalculable in each of us. We don't know what we're like. We can't know what other people are like. How then can we put any trust in personal relationships or cling to them in the gathering political storm? In theory, we can't, but in practice, we can and do. For the purpose of living, one has to assume that personality is solid and ignore all contrary evidence. And since to ignore evidence is one of the characteristics of faith, I certainly can proclaim that I believe in personal relationships. This brings me along to democracy. Democracy starts from the assumption that the individual is important and that all types are needed to make a civilization. Those who are sensitive and want to create something or discover something and don't see life in terms of power get more of a chance under democracy than elsewhere. Democracy has another merit. It allows criticism, and if there isn't public criticism, there are bound to be hushed-up scandals. That is why I believe in the press, despite all its lies and vulgarity, and why I believe in Parliament. The British Parliament is often sneered at because it's a talking shop. Whether Parliament is either a representative body or an efficient one is very doubtful, but I value it because it criticizes and talks, and because its chatter gets widely reported. So 2 cheers for democracy. 1, because it admits variety, and 2, because it permits criticism. 2 cheers are quite enough. There is no occasion to give 3.
Thank you, Joyce, for a timely and thoughtful reading this morning. A reminder that all members can sign up for a reading. They simply go to our website, portlandhumanist.org, and sign up under the Members tab. Restoration of tidal ecosystems in the lower Columbia rivers requires both ecological and engineering considerations. This morning's presenter, Matt Cox, will highlight how two adjacent restoration projects, Carey Island and Westport Slough, can have very different opportunities and limitations. Other projects from around the country will be highlighted to frame a larger discussion about the re-engineering of the built environment with ecosystems. Matt Cox is a senior water resources engineer and has worked with Inter-Fluve since 2013. Prior to his work at Inter-Fluve, his work experience has included time as a faculty research assistant in the ecological engineering department at Oregon State University, where he earned his master's in 2002. He has also served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Bolivia and as an instructor for the National Outdoor Leadership School. Let's have a warm yet muted HGP welcome for Matt Cox.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you coming to your screen on a Sunday to chat about ecosystems. So yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen and we will be off. Okay, just to make sure, is everybody seeing a title slide here with, okay, excellent. Great, so I love talking about these two projects because they're right next to each other and they are both restoration projects and they're also kind of different. And so it's just, they're a fun contrast that describes kind of how we approach ecosystem restoration. So yeah, appreciate the opportunity to talk about them today. Starting just to, let's see here, slide 2. It's our Columbia Basin, and the reason I like working in the estuary, we work other places. A lot of our work, especially on the West Coast, is in the Columbia Basin because of endangered salmonids. And it ranges the species that we work with. Whether it's steelhead, whether it's spring chinook, whether it's fall chinook, and we work all over, Washington and Idaho, but all those fish, every single one of them comes through the estuary as a part of their life history and spends time there. And so, working in the estuary, if you care about fish in Idaho, working in the estuary is great. And if you care about fish in the Methow, working in the estuary is great. So that's, I especially like working down in the estuary just because it's so integral to fish in the entire Columbia Basin. I think that there's been a lot of work, planning work, that basically suggests that, the way that we, the best thing we can do to restore ecological function in the lower estuary is reconnecting floodplains. And, quite a bit of the former floodplain habitat has been lost down there. You'll see in some of these maps I pull up just kind of how profound it is, the changes that have happened. And so, this is something that it is pretty beneficial, and it has, it's not totally new. In the last, sorry, this presentation is a little dated from 2017 when we first gave it. I haven't updated my stats to 2021, but over 50 restoration projects in the estuary. Something like 5,000, a little over 5,000 acres of floodplain habitat, and half of that being wetland habitat has been reconnected or restored. So this is work that's ongoing. We're still involved in it now, several projects, and there's other groups as well working down there to basically put together some of this habitat that's been lost. So, and I think that I wanted to start the talk just framing a little bit when we talk about restoration in these areas, sort of the ecological context. And so, if folks who've been out in sort of tidal areas, there's always, an open water tidal channel, and then there's, kind of a mud flat area where you don't have any vegetation growing, and then you'll see it kind of transition up to, emergent vegetation, whether it's sort of eelgrass or other things. Sometimes reed canary grass can be a problem, but and then as you transition up in the elevation, you start seeing more woody vegetation. And up at the high end, some of the really coolest places out on the coast are the spruce swamps. Sitka spruce grow at like 10 to 12 feet elevation in a lot of places. And so unfortunately, there was no spruce swamps on these two projects, but if you're interested, there's other projects where we did some spruce swamp work, which is pretty cool. So that's the context that we're thinking to help us think about these marshes and what's possible. Here's just this is a kind of a picture that tells that story. This is a photo from a slough near Willapa Bay. You've got your open water channel, you've got your mud flat, low marsh that's dominated with this the forbs, and then starting to get into high. This is not a great rendition of high marsh here. There's some woody vegetation on the higher elevation zone here. So that's kind of our context. And so and I want folks to think about that, as we as we look at these two sites and the opportunities and challenges of doing restoration there. So this is kind of an aerial photo. This is actually from, I think, 2018. Carey Island is in the foreground, and then the Westport unit is sort of in the background. I'll use my little pen just because I love the pen. This is Carey Island right here, and then this area over here is the Westport unit. So you know what you're looking at. And oh, look at that. So the bigger picture context of where are we in the lower estuary? So we're on River Mile. It's about 45 up to Columbia. So we're near the town of Westport, and just downstream of the Klatskanai River comes in just upstream of the project site. And I'm going to, hopefully this works. I'm gonna bring up Google Earth and just zoom in a little for you here. So we've got Portland down here, Longview, and then gradually it becomes more and more sort of estuarine as you go, less riverine and more estuarine as you go downstream. So the intrusion of salt water in the estuary kind of usually ends somewhere around Skamakawa. So this is all fresh water. So there's no salt water intruding this far up into the estuary. But the tides, there's significant tidal signatures. So we've got like sometimes 10 feet of tidal water elevation swing. So so it's tidal, but it's fresh water, which is interesting, and it's different vegetation that can handle that. So as we zoom in a little bit further, you can get a sense, I think, how agriculture has impacted a lot of these floodplain areas. You can kind of see, here's Cathlamet on the Washington side. Most of these areas that were historically floodplain are now in agriculture. So and as we zoom in a little further, Klatskanai River, there's a town of Klatskanai River coming in upstream, and then little town of Westport here. If you've driven out to Astoria, driven through it. And then these are our two locations here. Carey Island is this little jelly bean. We lovingly call it the jelly bean right here. And then Westport unit right here. So that's kind of the location where we're working. Close up Google Earth and keep on rolling. So just some stats. Carey Island's about 100 acres. And so Carey Island was completely levied off starting in, it's unclear, but maybe, in the 20s or 30s. So when we started working there, it had been levied completely for 80 to 90 years. It's, it was, you can kind of see the drainage ditches in the interior of the island. This was purchased by the Columbia Land Trust in 2013, and that's who we were working with to design the restoration. The Westport unit is a little bit larger, 147 acres. Now it's levied all the way around, and it was used for logging enterprises and stuff. But this slough channel was only, from what we can tell in the aerial photo record, was never completely cut off, or maybe for some dozen of years or something like that. But mostly it stayed connected, and that's important bit of information. And then we worked with another group called CREST that you guys have you maybe heard of Columbia River Ecosystem something task force. I always get their initials wrong, but it's another NGO that does river restoration or estuary restoration projects in the Lower Columbia. And there's a couple other entities that work down there quite a bit. Some of you may be familiar with the Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership based in Portland. So this is these two sites, similar, kind of like a perfect sort of paired situation. One's been levied off for 100 years, and one's been had tidal water for 100 years. So that's important. For both of the projects, we just wanted to increase their connectivity to basically restore tidal hydrology, and that had it was focused on fish habitat, the quality, quantity, and connectivity for salmonids who are using Westport Slough Lower Estuary, and we wanted to restore native vegetation communities, or at least put them on a trajectory towards restoring native vegetation. So this is something that when we talk about restoration, I try to explain that our perspective is that we want to try to put systems on a trajectory towards recovery. Like, we often can't, get everything exactly to a historical condition or a historical function, in one construction event. What we're trying to do is put things on a trajectory towards function. So, just a little bit of background of the two sites. This is a picture from Carey Island. You kind of see the road is up on the levee, and then over to the left is sort of the interior of the site that was used for mostly cattle grazing for the last at least 20 or 30 years. We didn't see much evidence of any row cropping or anything like that in there. So pasturing, and then next door, Westport Slough. This is we had some fun rainy fieldwork days out there, and we were doing some measurements of the geometry of tidal channels, and you can kind of see that the woody vegetation is completely dominant on the floodplain there, and and it's pretty slow going to work your way up through the tidal channels. So pretty different existing conditions. And this is, whenever we're looking at a restoration project, we always want to try to gather as much information as we can about what was the system like before, and often this information is imperfect. When we talk about restoration in the interior, beavers were extirpated 50 years before any European settlers even arrived. So the impacts to river systems have sometimes been profound and have happened long in the past. And so we really have to try to train our lens as far back in time as we can, but also with the constraints of the world as it is today. And so that's kind of the fun and the challenge of doing these projects. This is a map. It was developed by the University of Washington for NOAA, with a historical land cover in the estuary. And so there's these maps all through the lower estuary based on some of the original cadastral surveys, what they found out there, to sort of identify what the land cover was like, pre-aerial photo or anything like that. And so we see our project area here, both Westport Unit and Carey Island, draw right there. We're in the forested wetland category. So that's a clue, and there's other clues that both of these locations were forested. There wasn't they were both high marsh basically in that elevation drawing. I showed you earlier. So, and so, yeah, there's a lot going on in this image, which is pretty interesting to me. So, this is LiDAR data, and I apologize if I don't know the audience how much you know about LiDAR, so I'm just going to spend just 30 seconds describing it. It's data that's collected from the air using lasers that are reflected off the ground surface, and then the returns are collected, and so you get a picture of the really detailed picture of the ground surface, and also some of the tree canopy and stuff like that. Becoming a very common piece of data that we use in our projects, and so we did have LiDAR data for this area, and this is what they call the bare earth LiDAR. So this is the kind of the bottom of the ground surface, not the tops of the trees. And what you'll see here is that the Westport unit kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. Elevations here are in the 9 to 8.5, 9, even up to 10 feet elevation in the interior of the Westport unit. You look at Carey Island, it's a very different story. Some of these lower locations like this are in the 6-foot range. So there's some spots even lower than that. So what that means is that there's been 4 to 6 feet of subsidence in Carey Island because of the leveeing. And I think this is fascinating. This happens, all over when you dry out wetland areas. And I'm not a microbiologist, so but my understanding is, that when you go from an anaerobic environment that's frequently inundated to an aerobic environment, that the bacteria get very efficient at breaking down soil organic carbon into carbon dioxide. And so what happens is the soil basically disappears as carbon dioxide. And that happens slowly over time. But when you've been levied off for almost 100 years and you lose a couple centimeters a year, that equals 2 meters of subsidence. And so, and you can see in this photo actually that all of these areas that are led behind this levee, everything is really low. It's really subsided. And this is thousands and thousands of acres that's right now in it's various agriculture. There's a lot of hybrid poplar, a lot of cattle grazing, but it basically this whole zone has just sunk down multiple feet. And so what that meant for us was that we're starting with a very different elevation template at Carey Island. We have basically it's 5 feet lower, and so the vegetation that's going to grow there is just going to be different than what's already happening in the Westport unit. So I could look at that all day, but I'll keep moving. I'm going to breeze through this quickly, but this is we always do a historical photo analysis, just to try to understand, sort of how things have evolved through time. And this 1870 up on the left is the original General Land Office surveys, and so we can see during those surveys, Carey Island wasn't an island at all. It was just a part of this sort of a marsh plain. And then by the 1920s, they've cut a channel to make it an island. And we think in the around there is when the levees were constructed as well. You can kind of see lots of log rafts in there from the forestry operations that were happening. All of these, if you zoom in closely, are just rafts there's hundreds of logs in there. And so by the 1970s, and I don't know why this psychedelic blue tint to the photo, but we're into just agriculture mainly in the last 40, 50 years. So and as we were thinking about how this is a zoom in with the LiDAR data, and in general, we wanted to remove sort of the drainage features that were a part of this, and we wanted to take advantage of some of the historical signatures. You can see actually like some of these tidal channel signatures that show up, in the LiDAR. You got this guy, you've got these little guys in here. So we sort of used those as a template for the channels that we designed and constructed. Among other things, which I'll talk about. There's a science, but definitely an art to tidal channel sizing. That's it's an interesting problem. Let's see. Okay, so that's kind of the background, and now I want to kind of step into sort of the design process, and then I'll after we talk about design process, I'll talk a little bit about the construction challenges for this one. So again, basically we want to breach the levee, restore native vegetation, create topographic diversity. This had to do with the subsidence. We basically wanted to use the material that we were going to be moving around to start the process of recovering some of that native vegetation mosaic. And then allow natural accretion to start to rebuild it towards high marsh. So, basically we wanted to set up an environment to where accretion, which actually happens at somewhat of a similar rate to subsidence, a couple centimeters a year, fine sediments come in, they land on the floodplain, and they start to build things back up towards high marsh. So we wanted to start that process happening. Another sort of engineering consideration that we had to really wrestle with was the tidal prism. So what this shows, this map here that shows the mean low tide of 2.35 feet and a mean higher high, which is the higher of the two daily tides, 9 and 9.4 feet. You can see at that elevation, the entirety of Carey Island is underwater, and much of it is under many feet of water. And so the tidal prism is the volume of water that's between the mean higher high and the mean lower low. And why this is important is that the outlet of tidal channels, there's a lot of work that's been done on this in the San Francisco Bay and other places. The sizing of the outlet of a tidal channel has to do with the tidal prism. How much water is coming in and out every day to that system. Similar to other rivers, are the flow rates, the flood flows dictate the sizes of the river channels. So in a tidal situation, it's the tidal prism. And in this case, by opening up Carey Island, we were actually increasing the tidal prism at the mouth of Westport Slough by 11%, which is, maybe it sounds like, oh, 11%, no big deal. But like, this is, it's like 500-600 feet across. It's a really big outlet at Westport Slough. And to think about that much more water coming in, I mean, this is 100 acres under 3 to 5 feet of water. So it's just really a lot of water that was going to be exchanged daily. And so we had to think about that and what the implications of that might be. This is the ferry that goes over to Cathlamet from Westport, the ferry dock. And so this is downstream of the project. So we had to do some modeling of what the proposed changes were going to be and what that might do to the flows in the lower slough, and how that might affect the infrastructure. Thankfully, this overhead power line, they've moved under the slough. They did that like the year after we did the project. So as an engineer, you're stressed out by these power poles that are sitting right next to the slough. You certainly don't want anything you do to affect that infrastructure negatively. So, the main tool that we used for that process was a two-dimensional hydraulic model, and I'm not going to go into all that, but basically it's sort of we model the flow depths and velocity over kind of a grid that covers the whole area to understand, if we open up Carey Island, if we open this up, you kind of see the depths there, right, are in the greens, right? So they're like a 4 or 5 feet depth of proposed conditions. This is existing conditions up top, proposed conditions down here. You kind of see there's no flow in there. There's nothing going on in Carey Island. So what was going on down here? What were the flows, looking like down here? Did we increase velocity? Are we going to increase erosion? How is that going to play out? So we had to do, quite a bit of modeling and sort of and looking at the data downstream to convince ourselves that we weren't in fact going to be causing issues around the banks. The take home from the modeling was that most of the higher velocities were sort of expressed in the center of the channel, where you have a pretty mobile bed of sand. And so we expected that most of the bed changes were going to happen in the center of Westport Slough. And so we felt pretty comfortable about what's going on at the banks. So yeah, so that's some of what we had to do to sort of get to a proposed design. And this design, don't worry about all the little words on there, but this pink stuff is where we were going to remove the levee. So we basically removed the levee of about half of the island. We didn't want to remove the whole levee because there was a couple of reasons. One was we didn't want flow to sort of cut off across in a way that was sort of uncontrolled and unmanaged across Carey Island. And then also we had this marina here, and we just didn't want there to be sort of any kind of unexpected changes to navigability for the folks that lived in that marina. And we thought that we could get the connectivity, back with about half of the levee removed. So that's the way we went. These blue areas are what we call the pilot channels that we constructed. So we know that they're going to be more of a network of channels that develop over time. But these were pilot channels, and the sizing of those channels. We used a lot of different lines of evidence for trying to how to size those channels. Westport, the next door, was one. We measured the channel dimensions at Westport. That was one of the lines of evidence. We also looked at some similar elevation systems out in the main stem Columbia to look at channel sizes. And then there was also some mathematical relationships that were developed more in the San Francisco Bay, and we kind of used all those together. And then also a bit of a trajectory. This is a trajectory question. Do you want your channels to be slightly oversized or slightly undersized? And then how will they evolve? Will they evolve in an erosional way? Will they get bigger over time, or will they fill in? And so all that kind of, we melded together for the sizes of these channels. And then the little green and yellow blobs are sort of areas where we were putting material for topographic complexity. So basically to using these zones to sort of just to start growing different kinds of plants to sort of boost up the transition towards high marsh. Basically get some woody vegetation growing out there, getting a seed source, so that as the accretion happens, you've got a transition where the hydrology allows it towards the high marsh. Okay, I'm gonna just because I want to get to the fun construction photos. I'm gonna breeze through these pretty quickly, but I think I just talked about the channel sizing quite a bit, and these are some of the pictures from during construction. We did our best to work the channels around existing vegetation where we could. So we would do adjustments in the field, basically to sort of kind of minimize our disturbance. But these are pretty significantly sized tidal channels. And we did, again, filling of the drainage ditches. This is something we wanted to get those linear drainage features filled in, so that they wouldn't recapture basically those sort of very man-made looking drainage paths. And then, again, topographic complexity. So we added, the material that we dug out of the channels and that we took out of the levee was placed all in the interior of the site. No material was imported or exported from the site. This is all moving material around on site. Revegetation, I'll go through this quickly, but basically the way the Columbia Land Trust, who manages this parcel, wanted to approach it was to do some planting, but also to do some wait and see and look at what happened with the natural seed bank and then some weed control. So that all of that is kind of ongoing. So there was some planting of woody vegetation. These are just like little planting zones and places where we were disking up the pasture grass, and there's a lot of different strategies there in the revegetation, but basically it was kind of an adaptive management approach to revegetation. And then we put a few large wood structures in, basically to provide a little cover habitat and some roughness on the floodplain. They were a pretty minor part of the project, actually. Okay, construction. Time-wise. So this was one of the, I think, more interesting construction projects that I've done, just because of how the timing and sequencing were so important. So you can see out here, you can see a tidal channel that we've dug, and then here's Westport Slough. So during the breach day, basically we did all the work on the interior of the site prior to the day when we let the tides in. Because once you let the tides in, you can't like run around in there with excavators and dump trucks. It's going to fundamentally change the character of the site. So we really had to kind of do everything we could leading up to this moment of breaching. Here again, here's some more sort of construction of tidal channels. This guy's checking elevations because we had pretty detailed requirements for the elevations of the channels. And then this is a picture of the levee with the day before breaching. So it used to be all like this wide and quite a bit higher. So they had stripped off the top of the levee down to a specified elevation that was still not going to let the tides in. And then they'd gone around and kind of peeled off the inside of the levee the last couple of days. Because I was very worried about, like, what if a little bit of water starts leaking through this levee, and starts getting in here and causing problems. So that luckily didn't happen. So, that's sort of day before breaching right there. And clear my drawings. I'll go to the next one. So breach day started, it had to happen in a single tidal cycle, right? Because you basically, once you open it up, you've opened it up. So the contractor called everybody he knew, and we had 9 excavators going on site. We started about 4 in the morning, and what we did was the tides were, we basically waited for a high tide. And then as the tide started coming down in Westport Slough, we just started digging and digging, kind of chasing the tide down. And so we were just sort of frantically moving dirt as fast as we could to get as much done as we could, prior to the tide turning and coming back into the site. So it was it was an exciting day of construction. This is a picture of breach day after the tides had come back in. So you can kind of see here the remnant levee that we were working on. And then this, from here to here is one of the openings. So, and then the interior of the site here is starting to really flood. So it was a wet day. It's like, it's often very wet out there, but just felt like there was water everywhere. And then this next photo is also a breach day. You can kind of see over here on the left side, there's some of our construction fill placement, but you can kind of see that the whole interior of the site now is completely tidal. We took some boat rides around, kind of looking at the site after the breach, and it was we got some nice rainbows that day, which was pretty exciting and beautiful. another kind of construction detail is that we had to use barges to move around several of the excavators. Once we had breached, we still had a handful of them that were kind of stuck out there on different locations. And luckily for Westport unit, we'd also had a barge that had taken us in there to do some of the work. So yeah, we had to go rescue some of those excavators with the barges. And I will actually, and I realized that this presentation mostly is about Carey Island because it was by far more complex. I'm gonna actually pull up Google Earth here real quick again to just talk briefly about what we did at Westport Slough, just to frame that back. So this is a post-construction aerial image from 2018. So the levee here at Westport, you can kind of see this is intact levee right here. And then there's these breaches that we've cut into the levee out here. And basically, even though this is all inundated, what we wanted to do is provide more access for fish. So this talking about the barges, we basically would land equipment on a barge over here and then pull the levee down in a section like this, and then put the material back over here. So, here's another levee breach, and then fill behind here. So again, we were just moving the material around, but what we were doing is instead of now one ingress and egress to all this floodplain habitat, now there's like 10. And so that is important for fish to just have access to this high marsh for feeding. It's also kind of a nutrient flux issue because lots of the material from the floodplain, as it's flushed in and out into the channel, provides a lot of insects and things for fish to eat. So, there's all these different locations for that nutrient flux to happen rather than just one. So this was a much less sort of extensive earthwork project. It was still interesting because we just had to do everything, landing each place on barges, but we didn't do any work in here because the floodplain's in fantastic shape. I mean, it was just really awesome, mature vegetation. So that's, that is just, and we didn't dig any channels or anything like that because we just didn't feel like it was worth the disturbance to an already really nicely functioning high marsh ecosystem. So that's kind of why that was kind of different. And I wanted to just flip through a few photos to conclude of sort of, where it's going. And unfortunately, I don't have any like this year recent photos from the ground. But so this is an aerial photo. This is our cover slide. This is immediately after construction. So you can see lots of bare ground, lots of these locations where we've, placed fill, just, it basically all looks like a big mud flat. But then this is 2018. So this is 2 years later. And this is sort of looking upstream towards the Westport unit. So you can see that a lot of the marsh plain vegetation has started to return a bit. You can still see some of the lower areas kind of are more open water still. And these are the most heavily subsided pieces of the floodplain. And so, that's interesting. There's some other interesting things going on that there's starting to be some channels forming from these pilot channels. Some places more than others, but you've got these sort of nascent little small channels that are cutting their way through the floodplain. And so it's starting to form itself, which is what we wanted it to do. As the tides drop and there's all this water in the floodplain, it goes pouring over there and it'll start cutting back in. And so as that happens twice a day over time, you get formation of lots of new channels, which is cool to see. And I have a few more photos because who wants to look at words? This is looking downstream, so you can kind of see the main stem, Columbia there, and you can see Westport Slough. So this is just another angle for that same 2018 area. And one thing I want to point out that I thought was kind of cool, you can start to see it, are these little blobs, which do correspond with the blobs on our design, where they did plant woody vegetation. They're higher elevation blobs. And so you can kind of, you can see the difference in color. There's starting to be a little bit more woody vegetation growing in those areas. So that's a start of the mosaic that we were looking for to get it on a good trajectory. And some non-aerial photos. Now this is from a site visit a year later, so 2019. And you can see that the marsh plain vegetation has grown back, pretty well. We're actually walking through a breach. So this is a levee breach. The edge of the levee breach is right here. This is the old levee right here. So you can kind of see where it used to be. And we're just getting a lot of sort of a variety of marsh plain vegetation growing there. I got a few more photos from that same site visit, and I wish I had one from 2021, but I don't. So again, this is a constructed tidal channel that's started to revegetate and sort of with after 3 years of tidal water starting to look a little bit more natural. Amazingly, we thought a lot of these mature trees would die because of the intrusion of water, but they've lived longer than I thought they would. But if they do get waterlogged and start falling in, they'll provide fish habitat. From the wood falling into the channel will provide extra complexity. So this is another breach location in the mouth of one of the channels. You can kind of see wood starting to sort of rack up. And it's I think the signatures of construction are still there, but I like to think that if you come back out in maybe a few more years, you would maybe not recognize this as completely man-made. That's always our hope. So there's one more picture of one of the constructed channels. So yeah, that is my presentation. And I want to thank a couple of people that were heavily involved from Inter-Fluve working on the project. Caitlin Alcott, she's an ecologist, and she was the project manager out here, making sure us engineers were not getting too over our skis, with the ecology. And then Mackenzie Baxter was our fisheries biologist, making sure that we were thinking through all the fisheries issues. And I guess, one thing I'd like to conclude with is that river restoration in general, we sort of like to approach it, and I think has to be approached as this multidisciplinary enterprise. Engineers are certainly only part of the puzzle, and you can't really do this effectively without folks, geomorphologists and ecologists and fisheries biologists, and people who understand all these sort of nuts and bolts of how these ecosystems function. And so I mean, that makes it really exciting. It's certainly every site, even if they're right next door to each other, can be pretty unique and different. And it's I've yet to run into a project that didn't make me question some assumptions or sort of or learn new things. So yeah, it's a fun line of work for sure. So yeah, but I'm happy to take questions or yeah.
Thank you, Matt, for a very informative and very beautiful presentation. Your photographs were so helpful in showing what you do. We have a number of questions, which I'll get to. We have a question from Al and Annalise and Willie and Kathy. I'll ask the first question, though. As someone who probably spends a little too much time following national news, I'm used to environmental issues having such contentious views and beliefs. And, in this presentation, it seemed like everything just went through seamlessly without a lot of consternation and wondering what to do and how to do it. Can you talk a little bit about that? Was it pretty much agreement and what needed to be done, or was there a lot of infighting along the process?
I wouldn't say, I mean, I think that it's, things can be complicated, especially when you work in a sort of a matrix of private landowners. One thing that made this project more simple is that we had one single landowner and who was focused on ecological restoration solely. That's not always the case. We do work on projects that have multiple private landowners, and that's kind of different. It can be like what one person thinks should happen, another person thinks shouldn't happen, or and so there's a lot more sort of consensus building that you need to do in that kind of a situation. And there's I didn't go into all of the different sort of processes to get a project like this on the ground, but there's permitting that you have to, you basically have to go through a permitting process because you're impacting waters of the US through the Army Corps of Engineers. There's a wetland permitting process through the Department of State Lands. And all of those, entities can sort of, but with feedback on the project can kind of impact things. Sometimes there's cultural resources. There was a cultural resource location on this site that we had to steer clear of. So those can be artifacts or some sort of other historical sort of elements. So a lot of those, I wouldn't say that any of this was contentious because we had a landowner who had a particular vision for this piece of ground, and then just hired us to help design and get it built. So we don't often, I mean, we bump up against things like water quality issues, things like that. But that's our bread and butter is just doing restoration design. And so we, we're not always in that sort of regulatory matrix in the same way. I saw somebody's message, like somebody's chat flash by about what Inter-Fluve is. And so we're a private company. So we're like an engineering design firm. So we work with a wide variety of folks to do ecological restoration design. So we work with like a lot of NGOs like Columbia Land Trust. We work with a lot of tribes throughout the Northwest region. We work with municipal entities, a lot in the Midwest and Canada. So there's a wide variety of folks that we work with, but we're in some ways not that different than your sort of engineering firms that design and build highways, except for we do only rivers and wetlands. That's our specialty, and it's pretty fun because we have 30 people in the building in Hood River who do nothing but river restoration, and so there's just a wealth of knowledge of people who've just walked rivers and been on the ground doing this stuff for 30 years. So.
Sounds good. Thank you. I will take the questions maybe in a slightly different order than they came in, but don't worry, I'll get to everybody. The first question came in the middle of the presentation from Willie Woolworth. I'll read it. I think I know the answer, but I'll let you take it, Matt. Her question is, why does levied land sink?
Yeah, I think we covered that. Was the main reason is the subsidence changes the anaerobic to aerobic change when things are levied off changes the microbial makeup in the soil, and so that carbon that's in the soil turns into carbon dioxide, and so slowly over time that sinks. There's some shrinking, I think, that has to do with just the lack of water and compaction. There can be compaction from cattle and other things that are part of the story. The main story of subsidence is that sort of microbial story. So, and it's similar in Louisiana, and you'll hear the word subsidence in a lot of sort of news articles about other parts of the country where it's going on.
We have our scholarship winner, Annalise Newberry, with us today, and college students are often busier than us old folks, so I'll let her come on and ask her question.
Okay.
We got you.
Can you hear me?
We got you.
Okay. I was curious what you observed in the fish that, or did you observe anything in particular that made you think that this project needed to happen? And then I was also curious what your certification or degree is, because I'm at school and I'm studying environmental studies, and I was just curious what your education is like.
Sure. Well, congrats on your scholarship. So the fish story, basically, we know that there's many species of fish that use Westport Slough. These off-channel habitats off the main stem Columbia are pretty important for juvenile fish in the estuary. So, it's places where they'll hang out for sometimes up to a year. Basically it's, eating food and getting big. So I do not know if there's been any sort of after the fact fisheries investigations at this particular site. I think it's been part of some studies. Mackenzie, our fisheries biologist, actually would be really the right person to, I should connect you with her, but she's great. There's been some like stomach content studies on different locations throughout the estuary. And my understanding is that, when fish have access to more floodplain habitat, they tend to be bigger, they tend to be more fit. And so I think it's sort of foregone conclusion. If you have the opportunity to sort of like take, levied off land and connect it back to tidal water, like it was historically, it's kind of it's beneficial in lots of ways for fish, even if they're not, even in an unquantified way. I think that, just getting more hundreds and thousands of acres of opportunity is really important. And then the second question, there's so my background, I had like a kind of a weird sort of path through. I did a chemical engineering undergrad in New Mexico, where I grew up, which was, I decided in the middle of that, I didn't really want to do, I was interested in nature, natural systems. And so I ended up in grad school at Oregon State in the department that's now the ecological engineering department. When I was there, it was called bioresource engineering. And so I worked with a group that was doing modeling temperature in streams. And so that kind of got me, temperature is a big issue in rivers, throughout Oregon and the West. And that got me into the sort of river world. And, I've just kind of stayed there over time. But my license is as a civil water resource engineer. So that, if I could go back in time to when I was at New Mexico State, I'd probably study civil engineering, because that's what I do now. So, but it's hard to know, as you're going down the journey of education, you kind of have to just keep correcting as you're going through. Are you at Portland State?
No, I'm actually at Western Washington University, right on Bellingham Bay.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from Kathy Humble. Kathy.
Hi. What you described in the way of planning and measurements and calculations, it was all so precise and so meticulous. And I kept thinking, in a couple of decades with global warming, isn't all of that going to go out the window? Or when they do predictions of water rise in the Columbia, is it not expected to be that great?
It's a great question, and I think that certainly that is something that we do think about, and it's a little challenging, because I think that the tools for us to sort of examine sort of climate change analytically into these projects. It's starting to become more sort of accepted practice. You know, in Washington, for example, if you're going to size a culvert or a bridge opening, you are now required to sort of make estimates for what flows how they might change in 50, 80 years. So as far as the water level rise and changing, you know, the way I think about this is if we've set up a system that can, you know, we already want it to change based on the you know, we want it to sort of accrete into high marsh, and we want it to sort of follow a natural trajectory. You know, some of that may, you know, change back into low marsh, you know, as water rises and you know, things become more inundated over time. And I think that we can try to, you know, for example, some of the spruce swamp projects that we've done, you know, we've gone out there and measured, you know, we see spruce between 10 and 12 feet elevation. Well, we want to like make sure that there's some 13, 14 foot elevation spots on our project that those spruce could potentially take a foothold onto, sort of to adapt to rising water. And so it's interesting that this is like a little bit of an aside, but because of the Cascadia subduction zone, we're actually not seeing sea level rise expressed in the Northwest quite in the same way that we're seeing in other places, like on the East Coast. So, you know, our land is sort of like sinking. And so that's like sort of making up for the sea level rise. Of course, if we have the big subduction zone quake, you know, that's going to completely change everything. But so, you know, we do think about it, you know, and certainly, you know, we want to sort of be cognizant of how things might change. And certainly if there's like infrastructure and risk situations, like if you were building, for example, a levee, a setback levee, which this is, you know, there's projects like this, right, where say that 100 acres, behind that 100 acres of inundation, there's a bunch of infrastructure that you don't want to be inundated. You know, if you're going to build a levee these days, you know, you've got to have enough elevation on that levee that climate change is considered. So, you know, it's part of the consideration. But I think that, you know, also just constraints. You know, in this project we had the footprint we had the material that we could, you know, come up with from the levee removal and the channel construction on site. And so, you know, we were limited in what we could do as far as changing the elevation of the interior of the site. But yeah, sorry, that's a lot of just, you know, sort of how it's considered. But, you know, I think that the truth is that this was designed, you know, 6 or 7 years ago, is that we weren't required to do anything analytical about climate change on this particular project, but that more and more it's sort of coming, there's more and more sort of methodologies available to us to sort of more analytically consider climate change on these projects. So
our next question comes from the humanist with the ironic name, Mr. Al Christians. Al. Al's building the anticipation. There we go.
Okay, Kathy asked, you know, a good part of my question, but I'm thinking that, you know, based on your slide there that showed a map from 1870, I would think that, you know, the upstate returns on your project don't come in until around 2270. You know, you went back 150 years to try to restore, and you would probably be trying to do something that might last 150 years. And not only climate change, but there are just so many different kinds of changes. How far ahead do you have to plan, and how many kinds of strange factors do you have to take in? You know, you mentioned species and salinity and rainfall, and there, you know, not just temperature, you know, temperature of the air, temperature of the water. What, and you mentioned, well, suppose there's infrastructure 100 feet away. Well, it maybe, or you know, how about if there's infrastructure, you know, real close in 50 years?
Yeah, I mean, you can't really plan for infrastructure that doesn't exist yet. Hopefully the future planners say, no, you can't put that there because it's going to get flooded. We haven't been great at that in the past, but the way I think about ecosystems in general is that they're very flexible systems. So plants and animals are going to adapt to changing conditions. And so, I mean, for example, salinity is an example. Right now, the plants that we can plant at this particular site are plants that can handle fresh water. Now, if salinity starts to intrude this far up the Columbia, which certainly some of the folks that model this kind of thing think will happen in the future, maybe 80 to 100 years from now, the template of vegetation is going to change completely, right? What can handle salt water, what can't. And so, but there's seeds carried, throughout these systems. And I would think that, as that sort of, this is just one example, as the salinity encroaches upstream, you're going to see plants that can handle that salinity sort of increase their range upstream. And so, I think that, with the way we thought about trajectory of the site was like, we want to recover the subsidence and get it towards high marsh. And the reason that is because, there's a lot of valuable ecosystem services from high marsh, a lot of inputs of nutrients and just a lot of different elements of the high marsh that are really important. And we think that's what it was before, but in some ways you just can't, sort of, if any of you guys have looked at the climate models. I have some friends who are climate modelers in Corvallis, and the error bars, they get real big when you go 100 years. And the way I look at 100 years from now is that the error bars are big, and it's hard to know. The best we can do is to do our design towards a trajectory that we think will help fish now. I mean, I think we want, the fish are in trouble now, and so we want to make sure that we cover that base, and that then we set it up to have a trajectory towards more functioning, and then curveballs will happen.
Our next question comes from our current president and the technical director of this Zoom broadcast, Mr. David DiNucci.
My question is, when you were talking about all this, I got to thinking about all this discussion that people have about terraforming planets. And I just, whenever they talk about that, I think about things like what you're doing. That is, the popular response, I think now, is what about terraforming Earth? And it seems to be so tough to even do. I mean, you were talking about 100 acres, and it sounds like a lot of work just to figure out how to handle all that. Do you have any, what is your gut reaction when people talk about doing like the ridiculously huge projects like that?
Well, I guess and this is sort of I guess maybe where I sit, but I'm kind of, I feel like human beings have done a lot of damaging things to ecosystems. We built all these levees. Yeah. We've changed, we have terraformed the Earth, frankly, and so I think that the way I like to think about approaching it is, we can terraform it back towards something that's a little bit healthier. At OSU, I think the tagline for the ecological engineering department, I was there when we were just starting it and sort of like developing the curriculum. And I think the tagline was designing human and natural environments for the mutual benefit of both, or something like that. And so, I think that, I'm certainly sort of, human beings, like it or not, I mean, we affect, almost every corner of the Earth right now. And I think that, a lot of that's negative, but I think some of it can be positive if we just kind of, you know, sort of take a wider view. You know, actually, can I share my screen again? One of this is, I didn't get to this, but you know, just to give you a sense of the sort of scale of projects that are happening out there.
Yeah, sure.
And there's a pretty sort of audacious project that's happening in the Midwest that we are a small part of. But you can Google and learn more about it if you'd like. It's in Toronto, downtown Toronto. And let's see here, where are you, Toronto? So just in sort of, you want to talk about impacted systems. You know, this area is where, you know, where basically it's the shore of Lake Ontario. And there's a river coming out through downtown Toronto called the Don River. And currently that river comes down here, takes a hard 90-degree turn, comes out through this shipping channel out into to Lake Ontario. And all these islands out here, those are all built out of dredged materials, right? So that's human being created islands out there in Lake Ontario. So, you know, the scale is, you know, pretty massive. But what they're doing in and you know, Canada is pretty progressive here, is they're actually taking, I think it's like 800 or 900 acres of this sort of old brownfield area, and excavating out all the contaminated soils, which there's, you know, many tens of feet of contaminated soils. Actually, they can't excavate out all the contaminated soils, and then they're putting down a sort of a geotextile liner to keep the contaminated soils out of the new river mouth. And then the new Don River mouth is going to come out here and meander out this way. And there's going to be actually another outlet out here. And there's going to be a bunch of wetlands in here. So, you know, you talk about terraforming, you know, this is just a massive project that, you know, is taking like really the worst, you know, this isn't old agricultural land. This is like industrial contaminated land and trying to make it into, you know, rivers and wetlands. So yeah, actually you can see some of the early construction happening out there. You can kind of see in the aerial photo some of the preliminary stuff going on. So anyways, it's just an example of sort of a more like a larger scale project where they're trying to put together a river mouth ecosystem that is at least more similar to the past than previously in quite an urban environment. And so, you know, I think that again, we built this built environment. I think that if with enough sort of vision and audacity, we can certainly start putting ecosystems back into our built environment in a way that is, you know, gets things on a more healing trajectory. So
I'll ask another question as we wait to see if there are any final burning questions that come in the chat. I promised a friend that I would ask this question. Her favorite country in the world is Bolivia. She spent a year there and really enjoyed the scenery and the people. And I was just wondering, was there anything that you took from there in your year in the Peace Corps that relates to your attitudes or your work now?
Good question. You know, I probably nothing like technical. It was you know, it was a lovely country. We were sort of in a valley at about 5,000 feet, which is very temperate in Bolivia, sort of between the tropical lowlands and the sort of higher altitude highlands. So it was lovely. But if I was going to say one thing that I carry with me from that experience that's useful, it's uncertainty. Trying to do anything get anything done in a different country requires lots of patience, lots of you know, meetings that start 4 hours later than you thought they were going to start, and project logistics that you know, get turned upside down because of road conditions or drivers on strike, or I mean, you know, any number of chaotic things. And I think that my main work there was building a water system or extending an existing water system to a bunch of different communities. And so it was kind of an engineering project. And, you know, it was just like the plastic tube came 2 months late, and just all kinds of, so that'd be my answer for what I take from there with me now into my work is like, uncertainty is okay. You know, we just have to keep moving forward and just sort of like kind of rolling with the punches with uncertainty, because we have uncertainty in our projects too, permitting, because of landowners, because of all kinds of reasons. You know, there's uncertainty. So.
Okay, I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Matt, for your presentation today. It was very informative, very engaging. Really appreciate your work.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.